Welcome to another Scientology Outside of the Church podcast. Tonight we have a very special guest. It is the one and only Scientology Girl. How are you tonight, Scientology Girl?
I'm very well, thanks, and you?
Very good. Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
So what have you been up to lately?
I have been, I know I've been very quiet, but I've been doing a lot of self-improvement, and also I am now the proud owner of 2 businesses, which is kind of like, I guess you could say one, because it both deals in art, but I like to keep them separate.
So would you attribute starting your own business to your training in processing or something else?
Oh, absolutely. You know, having all that training as well as doing all the courses and stuff really helped me, clear out some of my own considerations that were flawed, which essentially was holding me back.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's been wonderful.
And how long have you been doing this?
I think it's been 3 years that I've been a Scientologist.
Yeah, about 3 years. Well, a little over. Yeah, independent, yeah. And when did you start your business?
I just started that in last year of, I think it was March.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, at first I did paid portraits, and now I'm in the sort of designing field and branching out as well. And hopefully this year one of my goals is to write a children's book. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So tonight we're going to talk about, based off of our last AOGP tech blog last week, we're going to talk about gatekeeping. This is something I just recently had heard the term on the midjourney.com website, and somebody was talking about it. And then I found it on Facebook, on the Midjourney Facebook page, and I'd never heard of gatekeeping, so I had to look it up. And sure enough, I thought, well, that's an interesting term for withholds. So let's talk about gatekeeping a little bit. You and I have a little bit opposing viewpoints on the good and the bad of gatekeeping. So to kind of base it off of the blog, gatekeeping is where somebody isn't giving information regarding something at some level in life, whether it be a high level or low level in Scientology or anything else, preventing somebody else from flourishing and prospering. At least that's how I see it. But that's what we're going to discuss, is gatekeeping. So gatekeeping in general is something that you see information being prevented from someone for some reason. Generally, it's because it helps one person and doesn't help another. At least that's the thought behind it. And I have a problem with that. As an auditor and a CS. Why don't you have a problem with it, Scientology Girl?
Okay, well, firstly, the article that you wrote also says that it's not just information. It can be things. It can be...
Yeah, it could be a lot of things, not just information. Yeah,
so I'm basing my opinion off of those factors as well as information, not just information.
Right.
I've written down several things, pointers, and we can address each one on why I think gatekeeping is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be, but it's not always. Okay, let's start. Okay, I just feel like gatekeeping can foster environments rich enough in adversity that it creates better survival. So what I basically mean is that if you have adversity in life, it can actually grow you, but it has to be, just enough. And if the information or anything is freely given to people, it doesn't make people responsible. It doesn't help them grow in any way. It can hinder their progress in life just by the fact that they're not learning anything new. And it's also not appreciated. I mean, if you look at how many courses we've given people over time, right, that were free, how many people actually finish those free courses versus how many people finish the courses that actually they pay for? There is value to things when you do gatekeep, essentially. It's not always a bad thing, in my opinion.
So in other words, you're saying exchange.
Yes.
So if somebody
Absolutely.
has some skin in the game, then they're more interested in, because they've invested money into it that they're afraid they might lose, as opposed to just getting information or something for free.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's almost a little bit irresponsible to just, say, well, no gatekeeping should ever happen. It's a bit, purist. It's a bit obsolete and black and white in thinking that there are never really any good times. There was a point that you also said that something about gatekeeping as a service facsimile. It can be, but I don't think it necessarily always is. My whole point really is just that, within everything in the world there is good things, there's bad things, and good can be used for bad, and bad can possibly be used for good. Like I read, was it Science of Survival? I don't know. But LRH mentions that, it is okay to kill the snake that threatens the baby. And so, I feel it's the same thing. Sometimes you do want to gatekeep. Take a look at Albert Einstein. He did the whole E equals MC squared. And, while that might be useful knowledge to some, to others, it's used to make nuclear weapons. And so I don't think that's very helpful for mankind. And you have to really look at it in terms of what's the greatest good for the greatest number. I think we'd all like to say, no, you can never kill. You never kill anything. You can never do any wrong. And there's a big difference for me in doing something that's wrong and doing something that's, ethical. So, like I said, killing something can be an ethical act. And with regards to gatekeeping, it's the same thing. If you need to keep that information from people who would use, information, resources, anything to better their own agenda, that would be a problem. So,
well, like let's say it's a low stakes sort of thing, just for the sake of the conversation. Let's say somebody has a book that they would like to read, and it's a hard to find book, and somebody else who has a copy of it and this person knows it says, hey, I'd be happy to pay you for that book. And the person says, no, I don't want you to read it. I don't want to lend it out. Is that different?
well, it depends again. If the book could be used for harm, look at Scientology, for example. It's one of the most incredible subjects there are. And yet in the wrong hands, it's created confusion. It's, we don't need to even mention how much hate and violence has come from it, I think.
Yeah,
when
well,
you look at, the church and stuff. In that sense, LRH gave us this, wonderful subject that can be used for evil. As well.
Anything could be used for evil. I guess, the thing with gatekeeping is, to me, the crux of the matter is why a person would hold something like that to themselves. If it wasn't going, anything could be harmed. The book that I mentioned could be used to bludgeon somebody to death with a sharp corner, for example. With the information not having anything to do with it. So anything could be used as a weapon in the physical universe, for example. Theta universe is a little bit different, but the point being is who's to say and who's not to say what somebody should have. And part of the reason I wrote that article is and I only mentioned it briefly in the latter part of the blog post, was, you know, that the church and the technology is sort of the white elephant in the room, so to speak. So that's a really good point to bring up in this, is that the technology, and you know, this goes along with what LRH says in the hidden data line PL, where he says there's absolutely no hidden data. And then you get people on the internet who say, well, you know, why would you charge this much money for all of the OT levels and all of these services and on and on and on and on. Well, I mean, you know, and I mentioned that a little bit in there as well, is that there's a reason to do that sort of a thing. And I agree with you on that in the wrong hands, it could be dangerous. You know, without getting into upper level material, it's a gradient approach, and this stuff is living lightning. It's lightning in a bottle. Right. So in that case, it makes sense. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any gatekeeping, but in this day and age where free energy exists, where faster than light space travel very likely exists within the confines of our own society, and they're not letting it out. I know that's a long stretch for people, but it's true. It's very likely. These sorts of things. At what point do you hold back the history of a planet? At what point do you hold back the fact that we travel the galaxy already? At what point do we hold back that they have the keys to the cure for cancer? And at what point is it good to keep a mid-journey prompt to yourself and not share it with other people when you've created a beautiful work of art with somebody? Which is where this all started in the first place, is that people didn't want to share their mid-journey prompts and this was the point that I thought that this would be a really good subject, because something like mid-journey that's free, unless you're paying a subscription, somebody can say, well, I paid for that subscription, so that prompt, a prompt, if you don't know what a prompt is in mid-journey, which is an AI art tool, that prompt is something that a person created. So if you spend a lot of time making a prompt, create a particular piece of art through AI, is it right or is it wrong to prevent somebody else from having that prompt? They can see your art, but you can't share the prompt that created that art so other people can use it. That's kind of where this whole thing started. And then we get into the OT levels, and then we get into the planetary stuff. So any thoughts?
Well, you know, LRH also says that, you know, sacrificing yourself is not actually a good idea. So sacrificing yourself for any other dynamic is not a great idea. And thinking along those lines, you could say that if you have something of value, but you know that letting it out there will lessen your ability to survive in some way, then I would say, is it really a good idea to do it?
Well, for example, you've created a prompt in Midjourney, and you've worked on it for a couple of weeks to fine-tune how you make prompts, let's say. And let's widen it out. It's not just one particular thing, but you spent time on this. Would you be willing to share that information with someone? Free.
You know, and that's the thing. I don't think that I should. And maybe that makes me a little bit selfish, but if let's say we're in an isolated scenario and there's only like 10 of us, and or let's say 100, and I make it easy for people to know exactly how I do things. It's kind of like giving away your recipe. You know,
Love and Herbs and Spices, the secret chicken recipe.
Exactly. And you know, not only does that mean I'm sacrificing my survival, because then 100 other people can know exactly what I do and how to make money, etc. But it would also be a case of watering down something. So you're taking something that actually has value, and then, you know, distributing, like, because here's the thing, the only thing that creates value is rarity.
Scarcity, yeah.
Scarcity, yeah. So if I'm basically giving it to 100 other people, it's going to be pointless. It's going to be useless.
Well, I mean, I mentioned that in the blog
If
post.
100 people had access to the KFC recipe, KFC would no longer be.
Well, right, but see, that's, and this is where it becomes, it gets into the murky waters of ethics and morals. So, I mean, if I asked you, I said, okay, so you have this mid-journey prompt that you want, and you've seen that the art that this person made with this is just spectacular, and you could do something with it, and they don't want to share it at all, at any price. At any price. How would that make you feel?
Honestly, I would actually be okay with it, because, that person has a right to communicate and not communicate at the end of the day. And if they don't want to communicate that, I'm going to be okay. In fact, I did ask myself this the other day, because I found that in certain situations I was not giving up certain information about my processes that I do within my business. And I looked at it and I was like, would I be okay if the roles were reversed, And totally, I really would be, because I would expect other people to respect my wishes that, figure your own thing out. I don't think that's unreasonable. If somebody has spent their own resources, including time, learning something, or creating something, or investing in something, or whatever, they should have rights to that. That was another point that I wanted to mention, was that if one says that gatekeeping in total, in general, is bad, then one should also be okay with giving up all their rights. Because essentially you have rights. So if you don't gatekeep your home, right?
Everybody will take your things.
Exactly. Everybody can come in. If you don't gatekeep your purse, that person has access to it. So where's the line drawn on what's a person's rights and what's not?
Well, that's a very interesting and good point to this. Is where is the line drawn ethically and morally? I mean, of course, you want to keep your house locked and your possessions locked and everything like that, so that somebody doesn't walk off with your prized Fabergé egg, for example, or something like that. Your Hummel pieces in your glass case, or whatever that somebody has that's of value to them. But if you're looking at information, and let's pull the scope back a little bit and look on a larger scale in a civilization. If the information is incredibly important, let's go political a little bit. You got information, say, like Julian Assange has, and he puts this on his website, and it blows the cover of what some of these governmental institutions are doing. He's not gatekeeping. He's telling people this should be known, and somebody needs to do something about it. And then they hole him up in a building in London for years, and then he gets kicked out of there, and then he gets put in jail, and he's not getting a trial or anything like that for not gatekeeping. And some would say, well, he gave away government secrets. Well, who decides what's a secret and what's not a secret? Why do governments that are supposed to serve the people try to control the people through gatekeeping as a larger example, instead of somebody's possessions in their homes and things like that? I mean, how do you feel about that?
That's, again, That's difficult to answer because when it comes to certain situations, sometimes I would think that it is important to gatekeep. In this scenario, I don't really know what good it does to be a whistleblower because nothing ever comes of it other than, oh, we're just a little bit more aware now of what's happening. You know, like when people were introduced to the whole whistleblowing of what's that guy's name? The guy who's Snowden, Edward.
Who is now a Russian citizen.
Right. I mean, people initially were like, oh, that's terrible, you know, WikiLeaks, yeah, hallelujah, you know, and then now, even as we sit as independent Scientologists, we leave our phone lying around, we talk about this kind of thing, you know, it doesn't matter. We know that people are spying everywhere, but that's as far as it goes. So it doesn't necessarily do any good. It doesn't do any bad except for maybe the individual. And maybe it does, I guess, make us more aware as a society of all these little things, but nobody's really doing anything with that information.
So in other words, you're referring to the expression that tyranny is when good men do nothing.
Yeah, I guess.
So if there is no gatekeeping and there is no holding back of information that is crucial for people to know, even then, what you're saying, tell me if I got this right, is that even when people have the information and think things aren't being gate-kept, they don't do something with them.
Yeah, exactly. I think we would much rather... We're complacent in that, you know, as long as we have our social media and our TVs and our, I don't know, beer on a weekend or whatever, we're fine. And that's a real problem, is that we've essentially become very desensitized to things. I mean, we just had UFOs in the US and Canada, and there was that like several train derailments and all of that stuff. But do you think people are rioting or doing anything with this? No. When, you know, COVID happened and stuff, when everybody was on lockdown, there were very few places that I can honestly say actually took action and did something. And even then, it wasn't enough. And I'm not trying to say, like, look, we should give up against the powers. I'm just saying we need to choose our battles. And another point was that gatekeeping can be used for good as well. And I think that's something that we should actually strive towards, is because I think our mentality that certain things should be avoided if we have to be ethical and good people and stuff like that, that's flawed, because when you really look at it, I think being thiry-weedy is the reason why we get into the problems that we do. Is because we can't confront evil, therefore we can't even think along those terms of doing something that forwards the progression of mankind, instead of, you know, being in fear. No, I can't do that. That's against my, you know, moral code or whatever, which is a load of crap, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the confronting of evil, which made me think, well, that's a point that I forgot to put in the tech blog, is that when people don't confront something that is evil, like, let's say, some of the things that Julian Assange made public about the war in Iraq, for example, the U.S. He put this stuff out there, and he had to confront, to say, look, this really happened, and he had videos with it and everything else. Do you think that the glibidity, the glibness of people is not glibness? It is an inability, you know, sort of a inability to confront evil, and what am I going to do about it? I mean, is that a factor in the willingness to accept gatekeeping because, well, there's a football game on tomorrow, and I'm going to be drinking beers with the fellas down at the pub watching the game. And that's one of the things that's always bugged me is that, you give people a coliseum to go to, and they're much more interested in these tiny little things that don't mean anything than they are in actually looking at what's going on and doing something about it. Obviously responsibility plays a big role in this. But is it the larger problem, a lack of ability of confront to look at things that are evil, and so therefore they're okay with gatekeeping?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you just have to look at all the very many tools used to suppress us, all of our addictions. And, I'm going to say, me included, at least 98% of the people who listen to this podcast are addicted to something, and they don't even realize it. Whether it be, and we can call it now, I'm supposed to as well, like your weekend beer, right? We can say, if you have to have your morning cup of coffee, if you can't function without it, if you need to scroll social media before bed, raise my hand, that's me. If you have to check your messages as soon as you wake up, before you even say good morning to your spouse. There are so many things that the system has put in place for us. If you go through, I don't know if this is in America, but in South Africa, if you go through, several different aisles in the grocery store, especially ones where you check out, it's just crazy how many sweet things are there. And sugar is addictive. I don't care who says what, sugar is as addictive as anything. And they put that there so that you can buy more. Because, what happens when you see something that is a trigger to you? You end up buying it. A lot of the time we don't have the self-control to say no, especially if we haven't confronted that part of it, like, hey, we shouldn't have this because it's bad for our health, etc. So to get back to your point, your question, I absolutely do think that unfortunately we have become a bit squishy as a society, and it's because of all these things that they put there for us to remain squishy and not have the
creature comforts.
Yeah, exactly. We're too comfortable.
Complacent.
What's that movie about that? Was it? Might be Wall-E. Or
the one with all the fat people on the
Yes,
spaceship. Yeah,
yes.
that's Wall-E.
And they're just, that is literally kind of where we are right now. And that movie was made like years ago. Of course,
and they saw it then.
Yeah, I mean, sure, we can still, drive and go out and walk to the beach and stuff. We can do things, but a lot of the time we just, it's just habit. We scroll through Facebook, we scroll through TikTok, all of this stuff. We use all these things to distract ourselves from our problems. Oh, was it? I watch TikTok every night before bed. Just, some of it is because it's my news. Other is because I struggle to fall asleep. I'll admit that. But when I read some of the stuff, especially with, the stuff that happens with Russia and these balloons or whatever, a lot of people are making jokes that it's World War III and stuff. And it is amazing how desensitized people are. They make jokes about it. And it literally could be something. I'm not saying it will be. I don't agree with fear-mongering, but, that's where we are right now. It's just, haha, World War III. Like, it's crazy.
Right. And to that point, are we being gatekept? Are we being gatekept with false information?
Yes.
When you shoot down, supposedly you shoot down no obvious propulsion ships, and then they say, or objects at 30 or 40,000 feet, and then they say, they couldn't find anything.
Yeah. Let's not forget the size of a car.
The size of a car. So, yeah, this is where it comes back to this: is this gatekeeping, and are we being gate kept, and we're just, don't look at the man behind the curtain type of a thing, in the Wizard of Oz. And so it's a distraction. Now, those certain people say that all of that stuff was a distraction, and that was gatekeeping to the fact that this chemical spill happened in Ohio.
Yeah.
And it was misinformation and misdirection.
Yeah.
To me, that's gatekeeping.
Yeah.
I mean, you're misdirecting somebody, and gatekeeping is the same thing in many situations. Same thing could be said for a grocery store and it being a food desert, and only buy the stuff on the outside of the aisles in the center. Is because you're being gate kept. I mean, you go to any grocery store in America or South Africa, and they sell natural food products, but they're 2 or 3, 4 times as expensive in many cases than the stuff that's not good for you.
Yeah.
But they'll be happy to sell it to you. And I feel like we're being gate kept on that, and it isn't any more expensive, but they're charging that much more for it because it's natural, or it's non-GMO, or it's organic. These sorts of things. And what's the line there on capitalism and gatekeeping? When is it not okay to lie to somebody and say, well, we can charge X amount of dollars for this particular thing, when it only cost us a mere fraction of that, but it's because it's organic that you can sell it for that much more, and people will just buy this stuff like crazy, and they know it in the industry. To me, that's gatekeeping. Is that okay?
I mean, the thing is that I've seen people in poorer communities who, even when things are the same price, they either don't have the knowledge of this stuff is worse for you than that stuff, or they just don't care. So I would say the more responsible one is like this is something that I've seen, because look, I come from a poor background, and I'm now not so much because of having my own successful business and stuff. So I have seen both sides, and I will tell you that the people who are being responsible, who are showing up for work and doing what they need to do and stuff, they definitely would buy that. They are able to buy that stuff, and to me, in South Africa, it's not that much more expensive. People say that it's expensive to live healthy. I say that's crap, because vegetables are way cheaper. Vegetables and fruit are way cheaper than the boxed stuff here. They're also way cheaper than eating out. Maybe it's different in the US, and if it is, then okay, fair enough. But for me, I just feel like it's a responsibility thing, and it's kind of, I might sound like a complete douchebag, but like when it comes to people being responsible or not, that does play a role, because as Alraj says, don't reward a downstat. Should we have everybody be able to have the same things that those of us who work hard for it, and another thing, people could call me spoiled, but again, I come from a poor background, so that kind of rules that out. I never had any major help. I mean, there was the time period that, you were sharing your iPad with me and stuff before I was able to grow. But I honestly believe if you have your postulates correct, any single person on this planet can make it. But again, auditing is quite important. But then again, a lot of people don't want auditing. So it's actually amazing how many people want the stuff that
they want the benefits.
Yeah, they want the benefits, but they don't want to do the work.
Right.
So
Right. Well, and that comes down to
maybe I'm a gatekeeper. I don't know. Starting to feel like one.
well, and you know, from the perspective of somebody, you give somebody something, like let's say you donate something to somebody. I donated a pair of shoes to a guy that didn't have a pair of boots. I gave him a pair of boots, and I expected to see him with those boots on.
Yeah.
I have not seen him with those boots on yet, and I think you even told me
He's going to
he's
sell
going
it
to sell
for
it.
drugs.
He's going to sell it for drugs.
Yeah.
And that made me, it just incensed me in a way, and it made me feel hopeless in another. And I refuse to become jaded in that type of a situation where I don't want to, you know, in anything, I don't want to be jaded. I don't want to change my viewpoint on something about help.
Right. Well,
with people.
I feel like you kind of have to a little bit, and you have to give people what they can have. That is the most important takeaway, I think, from this whole thing, is that you have to give people what they can have, because obviously I know the guy you're talking about. So I've seen him every time that you've bought him a sandwich or something, he's been like, thank you, and he eats it immediately. So he can have sustenance, immediate sustenance. He can't have a new pair of shoes or a second-hand pair of shoes. It's the same with, information and stuff. If the US had to announce on television tonight that they're having an alien invasion, I'm pretty sure there would be protests. People would be freaking out. People across the world. It doesn't even have to be just the US. People would be freaking out because they can't have that information. I would be freaking out.
Well, supposedly they did a test in the 40s to see what would happen in society if they introduced the fact that we were no longer alone in the universe and that there were other sentient beings, numerous, and they said that people would be jumping out of buildings and all of this stuff. So now that we're in the second half of the hour of our podcast, this kind of brings us to, if gatekeeping isn't incorrect, who gets the say as to what you gatekeep with, and why? And why does that person or persons or that organization get the right to it? Because, like we just discussed, you give somebody who's been very, very poor their whole life a significant amount of money to them to help them with their life, and they just squander it, for example, and they don't buy themselves a car, and they don't buy themselves a nice flat to live in or apartment. They don't do any of those things.
Right.
Does that justify gatekeeping if you were to properly, if you introduced it in a different way and you didn't just give them all this mess, this matter, energy, space, and time, this happiness, these items, or the money to get these items, and you properly introduce them to things, would it be okay to do something like that, or would they still blow it? And should you gatekeep, and you should just keep them down, and if they rise up, and then that's where I wanted to head with this in the first place, was the morality, the ethics of the situation when you're in a situation like that. Is if you gave everybody a financial grant, which they're talking about doing worldwide now, where everybody has a income that they get from the government. Is that right? Is that wrong? Is that gatekeeping? If you have a social credit like they do in China, where you can, the better a person you are and the more boxes you tick, the better your social credit is. Is that gatekeeping?
I feel like I'm going to walk into a trap, because I like the theory of it. It sounds good on paper, but I'm not sure it would work, and I'm not about to announce myself as like a socialist or anything. But it's a tough question, Because I think gatekeeping does have its part in the world, but I don't know if it should be as extreme as it is right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the expression, the statement that begins with, the world is not ready for ...
Right.
That generally means that there's some gatekeeping going on because people aren't responsible. And, you know, from a Scientological standpoint, you and I both know, and we've seen, we deal with a lot of different people from different walks of life and things like that. And it seems like the more generous we are with people, the less they appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that includes anything, information. You know, if we made Scientology free, Independent Scientology free within our organization, I don't think we would see that much more of a difference than we have currently with people. You know, like at one stage I thought, yeah, if, you know, we made the subject free, maybe we'd have like 50 new people join at once. But I don't think that's the case. I think it would cheapen it, to be honest.
So where does exchange end and begin?
Well, there has to be some sort of exchange. It doesn't have to be financial. We've had several people who, you know, have, I guess, like worked for us, who disseminated and that sort of thing. I mean, I remember you had somebody who worked for you, and you gave them their bridge, and they still turned around and were kind of iffy at the end. We're not going to go into details, but
And paid.
Yeah.
And paid them in the last year.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so was that necessarily appreciated? Should you have gatekept? I don't know.
Yeah, gatekept.
The
Well, it makes
the
you
OT
wonder.
levels a bit.
Yeah, it makes you wonder in retrospect. You know, it makes me think of this person that we know, where they're given a motorcycle, and they can ride the motorcycle, and the motorcycle is in their boss's name, and they're slowly drip fed through small micropayments, the motorcycle,
Right.
in order to keep them around. I've seen that a lot, and I have a lot of problems with that.
Right.
Because there's a difference between gatekeeping, or maybe there isn't, between gatekeeping and flat out manipulation.
Right.
And that and then suppressiveness beyond that. And is that somewhat suppressive with somebody? So what are the different dividing lines or tiers in that?
For me, I honestly think that it's all up to the individual. There's always going to be evil. There's always going to be people who would manipulate others. There's going to be gatekeeping.
Different tone levels.
Yeah. I mean, there have been people in my life that have burned me bad, including even family members where, information was gatekept and stuff like that. But in saying that, I wanted a change, and there were things that I always focused on, which was that I wanted to know about the world. I wanted to know what, I just wanted to know, which ironically I found Scientology, which is knowing how to know.
Right, and that's a big part of it, is knowing how to know.
Right, and so I feel like that which you focus on, or that which you put your attention on, you pull in. So if you're going to be pulling in manipulation, well, if you struggle with responsibility and stuff, that's also something to take into consideration. What makes you as an individual worthy of getting whatever that is gatekept.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's that you cannot pass go until I say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I experienced that. We were just talking about that the other day, about doing lower conditions
Right.
in Scientology. And my friends telling me, you know, no, you haven't. You haven't done enough. You know, you need to go work in the kitchen at the Fort Harrison for another 2 weeks, and all this stuff. And I really felt that it was going too far, like it was a clique almost, or something like that, because they were going to do to somebody that, I mean, you know, and then you're looking at overt motivator sequence, they were going to do something to somebody that they had done to them, and it was time to rub their nose in shit.
Yeah. Well, they also had an MU because, you know, if it's the liability condition, doing more than what's expected has to be within whatever area it's in. You can't say, well, you got to wash my car to make up the damages for sleeping with my wife. You know, it's totally illogical.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't equal out.
Right. So.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, and granted, ethics is a personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody says to you in a liability condition that you're doing, that you have to apply for re-entry into the group,
Mm-hmm.
and they look you in the eye, and generally, like in this situation, these were other guys that had done the same course as I had. They knew about the conditions. All of these things were understood by the people, because these were my peers. Mm-hmm. These were the people that I had to get to sign my liability. And they're all looking at me with a hairy eyeball. Do you feel you did it? And I was like, yeah, I do feel like I did it, because it was as infractions go at the time, it was a minor infraction. I mean, it wasn't anything like what you were saying at all. At least it wasn't to me.
Yeah.
But, and then after I'd say, I do feel like you did it, then they would say, well, I don't.
Oh my goodness.
So I felt, I mean, you know, that's not gatekeeping.
Mm.
I don't think. It's not gatekeeping. And maybe it is. We won't let you in.
Yeah, it is kind of.
We won't let you in.
Actually, it's literally.
Okay, yeah. So it is. Yeah, literally, we won't let you in. You cannot come through that gate, through that portcullis, and back into the castle.
Exactly.
Until you've dug that moat another foot deeper and put water in it. I don't care how hard it is, you can't come back in. So that brings us to this point of, and this is where I wanted to be right about this time in the podcast, was in Scientology, Independent Scientology, we have to gatekeep or we don't. Are we gatekeepers? When we say, look, you need to do an OCA, you need to do an IQ test, you need to do this, and this that LRH says. You can't just, oh, well, I blow engrams by inspection, and you know, all this stuff, and I you know, I know the clear cog, and da 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 da. I mean, you know, you and I know that person hasn't made it honestly. Mm-hmm. I'm not pointing out any particular individual. I've heard this a bunch in the last 11 years. But you know, I mean, because, you know, there's my viewpoint, like it says in the axioms. There's your viewpoint, my viewpoint, and our agreed upon reality. Mm-hmm. Gatekeeping is not, correct me if I'm wrong, gatekeeping is not an agreed upon reality. So you're looking at two people that have a different viewpoint on an agreed upon universe. So it's not an agreed upon universe. Mm-hmm. So what do you do in that sort of a situation? And I'm not necessarily...
Greatest good for the greatest number.
Well, the greatest good for the greatest number. And you and I both know that as co-executive directors of AOGP, that there is a correct way to do things. There's a standard way to do things, and those things work. I'm not going to give somebody upper level material information when they haven't even done a Purif, for example, and for good reason. Mm-hmm. Now, that said, gatekeeping. One man's gatekeeping is another man's suppression.
Yeah.
is the way that it seems. It's that same expression of one man's freedom fighter is another man's rebel.
Well, you know, you say it's suppression, but I don't feel it is. I feel like if you really try hard enough, you can get to know whatever it is you want to know. You just got to dig hard, or, you know, everything in this universe, in my opinion, is open. The only barriers are yourself. The only barrier you have is basically yourself and your mind. I mean, LRH made that perfectly clear when he said considerations are senior to the physical universe, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter for me what somebody else gatekeeps. It was going back to my history again, it was a difficult thing for me to crawl out from poverty, and we're talking about not even having butter for bread kind of poverty. And I actually, those who know me from the independent field and have me as a friend on Facebook have actually seen I've made a post about that. So I could be like probably 2/3 of my country and say, well, oh, you know, I can't do it because everybody's gatekeeping everything else. You know, and then it gets into the race thing and all that stuff, which I'm not going to bring into this conversation. But there's a lot. I think if you make your focus about the problem of gatekeeping, you won't uncover what you could uncover if you just tried hard for yourself. Mm-hmm. Because then what you're doing is you're putting responsibility onto somebody else instead of putting it on yourself to be like, I can find this out if I want to. I can have that if I want to. I can be that if I want to. Mm-hmm. And
in other words, what you set out to do, and you make your postulates and your decisions.
You create your own universe.
And you can get there, and you can be that actor, or you could be that author, or you can be that artist, and less focused on the counter intention. Like LRH says, there is no such thing as counter intention, only failed intention.
Right. I mean, when AOGP was experiencing so much suppression, I think we tried to get involved, and you know, we thought at the time it was a good idea to try to stop it, and it ended up just kind of making us not go anywhere because we were focused on that. But as soon as we just were like, let's just try flourishing and prospering, things just dramatically changed. Mm-hmm. So
instead of standing up on the castle walls, I think I saw something move out behind that bush. Right. You know, right. in fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you really want to look at it some way, we could say that at that point in time, with all the suppression, they were trying to gatekeep others from getting the information from AOGP, but also gatekeep away from us, clientele, basically. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, it never paid off to do anything to them. The best thing we did was just to focus on our own future and postulates, and I think it really paid off.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, in a way, we were in that situation. We were dealing with authoritarianism.
Yes.
Where it was pretty much we're the authorities. No, we are not calling ourselves authorities, but you have no authority over us.
Yeah. Sort
of a thing. So, does authoritarianism have something to do with gatekeeping?
Well, obviously, most people who are in, you know, authoritative positions, they like to gatekeep.
Okay, and you know that begs the question: well, what makes you an authority?
Agreement.
Well, that's very true. Is you either agree or you don't agree. And if
Yeah.
you don't agree, you take your ball and you go somewhere else. And you know, if it's a country, you go live on an island with no government, no running water, no electricity.
Still have to pay taxes for that island.
Yeah. So it's a really weird situation when you're dealing with something like Independent Scientology, where you have a couple of different groups who are all saying that they're authorities over something.
Mm.
And like LRH says, you know, the work was free, keep it so.
Right.
What do you do in a situation like that yourself? I mean, what viewpoint, in closing here for our podcast, what's your stable datum on that as one of the directors of AOGP?
Probably, I would say, let them do what they want, because they're going to do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing we could do is just focus on our own productivity, focus on our own efforts. And if that means we need to gatekeep, to do things like keep an exchange in and keep Scientology working and not have things like OT levels or cognitions out there for everybody, then that is, in my opinion, the greatest good for the greatest number.
Mm-hmm.
But in saying that, my greatest good is not everybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm at right now. Is I'm focusing on my dynamics, and I think it's important for everybody else to do the same, because if you're focused on everyone else and not focused on the things that you need for your life and your reality, that's not great.
Mm-hmm. Right, so it's an individual or agreed upon group thing where a group has they have their own set agreements in the three types of agreements, yours, mine, and the agreed upon thing, and that's what a group was, and that's what LRH set out to do. And you know, from my standpoint and things that we've talked about as the directors, that our goals are a certain loose organization, as he puts it, type of goals, and no heavy-handedness, and we let people have their self-determinism and everything, but you have to also keep certain things in.
Yeah.
Otherwise, then it becomes gatekeeping.
Yeah, which goes back to my initial point, is that we cannot have it as an absolute concept. Some gatekeeping is necessary, some gatekeeping is good, but it's not all good and it's not all bad. The deciding factor, I think, is just within your own realm of responsibility and the people around you who you can influence and can get into agreement with, which would be, you know, your personal third dynamic, your you know, family, your whoever. So it's important to know that, yeah, it can't be absolute. You've just got to use your best judgment, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same with everything else, really.
You can't be black and white with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Scientology Girl, I've enjoyed this conversation greatly, and we really appreciate having you on the podcast, and it was a heck of a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Folks, we'll see you next week. New Tech Vlog coming up on Tuesday, and we'll hopefully have another podcast come out over the weekend or Monday of next week. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.